I think one of the most exciting projects I've done that I'm so enchanted with is working on sculptures on the theme of the shroud. And this really captured my imagination. I think one of the reasons is because there's no real artistic interpretations that I've seen of the Shroud of Turin. And so here it's an amazing blind spot that I can throw light on. And so it all started out with my Sacred Heart sculpture, which includes the shroud to symbolize the resurrected Christ. And so discreet, so subtly done. I wanted to move into doing more pieces that celebrate and acknowledge this shroud. To me, it's so mystical, creative, in the sense that there's so much that one can do in interpretation of it. So the first sculpture that's strictly on the shroud is indeed the shroud itself. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to have the shroud with the form of Christ embedded within it, impressed within it. And so to do this, what I did was I initially started with sculpting a figure and then putting the cloth on top of the figure. And so it's pretty abstract, and I think it had to be abstract because my job was, in a sense, to make that shroud come to life. And I did it with the folds, I did it with the subtleties. And what I often thought about as I was working on this is not only other representations of Jesus, but also the history, especially within sculpture, of creating the veiled figure, which I always found gives a ghostly, spiritual connotation to the image that's being represented. So this, I do believe, is the first sculptural interpretation of the shroud itself. Not the Jesus, but the shroud. The imprint is the Jesus. The impression is there. I think it's going to really promote and support this historical fundamental element of Christianity. And I'm so happy I finally created it. In my studio during the same time as I'm working on the shroud, in fact, right in front of the actual shroud sculpture, is a representation of Jesus inspired by the shroud. I took the information that was embedded within the shroud to create a face of Jesus, a face that's alive and animated, but also borrowed distinct elements from that impression within the shroud. This representation of Jesus is inspired by the final chapter of John, where he's risen, he's there, he has fish, and the discovery of Jesus in this sculpture is very similar to some of my other pieces, like Be Welcoming, where the stranger turns into the angel. Well, here you have, again, a shrouded figure that from the one side could be anyone, could be a homeless person, could just be someone seated on the ground. And the reveal happens when you approach the front of the sculpture or the other side of the sculpture. You see that face of Jesus, and you see in his hands is a plate full of fish. At first, there is that ambiguity. Who is this person? And then it's discovered that it is Christ. This sculpture does the same as the scripture through that almost theater where you experience the one side and then the identity of the Christ is revealed from the other side. I'm very happy about this piece, and it's now part of my library as a Christian sculptor that I think is going to be very much appreciated by people that want to subtly celebrate Jesus.